Imagine, just for a moment, the absolute worst-case scenario. And I don't mean a stock market crash or, a bad election. I mean the end of your world.
The actual foundational structures of your society
Mm.
just crumbling.
Everything you took for granted, your safety, your identity, your belief in your own permanence, it's all gone, seemingly overnight.
It's a really hard thing for us to truly visualize today. We're so accustomed to a certain level of stability, or at least the illusion of it. But for a Roman citizen in the year 410 AD, this wasn't some kind of hypothetical exercise.
No, this was the reality they woke up to. It is the unthinkable.
Absolutely.
You're living in Rome, the eternal city. And that's not just a cool nickname, right? It's a theological statement. It's a promise.
It implies a permanence that is almost divine. The city has stood for 1,000 years. It conquered the entire known world. For you, it is the center of the universe.
The psychological weight of that phrase, the eternal city, it implies it cannot fall. And then you wake up on August 24th, 410 AD, and the unthinkable is happening.
The Salarian Gate is open. The Visigoths are inside the walls.
And the smoke is rising. That's the image from the sources that always gets to me. The smell of burning cedar from the villas, the dust from collapsing temples. The very air would have tasted the disaster.
All of it. The statues of your ancestors, the forums where laws had been made for centuries, they're being toppled and burned. It's an apocalypse.
So today, we're not just talking about a historical event. We're really talking about how human beings process the end of their world. We're going to do a deep dive into one of the most significant books ever written, sparked by this exact catastrophe, St. Augustine's City of God.
It is a massive work, and honestly, it's often misunderstood. People think it's just this, dry, heavy book of theology.
Right, something you'd only read in a seminary.
But when you look at the sources we're focusing on today, and we're really digging into books 1, 5, and 8, you see it's so much more. It's a masterclass in crisis management, in political philosophy, and really in how to deconstruct an argument.
And it was written in the heat of the moment, wasn't it? Because when the eternal city falls, people don't just sit around and mourn quietly.
No, not at all. They look for a scapegoat. They need to know whose fault this is.
The blame game starts immediately.
And the finger pointing in 410 AD was immediate, and it was vicious. You have to remember the context here. Rome had been officially pagan for 1,000 years. Jupiter, Mars, Juno, these weren't just myths. They were the divine guardians of the state.
But that had been changing. The empire had recently pivoted.
It had. Under emperors like Theodosius, the empire had officially become Christian. So the old pagan aristocracy, and there were still many powerful intellectual pagans in Rome, they had a very simple, very clear narrative ready to go.
It's a pretty compelling argument on the surface.
It's a very simple cause and effect argument in their minds. We worship the old gods, and for 1,000 years, Rome conquered the world. We switched to this new Christian god. We stopped the sacrifices to Jupiter, and boom, the barbarians are at the gate.
Jupiter protected us for a millennium. Jesus has been in charge for a few decades, and now the walls have fallen. It's more than just a political complaint. It's a theological crisis.
That's the core of it. If the Christian God is all-powerful, all good, why is his new capital city on fire?
That is the spark. Augustine, who's a bishop over in North Africa at the time, hears these accusations that Christianity made Rome weak, that abandoning the old ways brought this doom, and he picks up his pen.
But he doesn't just write a pamphlet or a quick rebuttal. He writes this sprawling, epic masterpiece that completely dismantles the entire pagan worldview, brick by brick.
Okay, so let's get into that. Let's start in the chaos of the sack of Rome itself. Augustine begins by looking at the event, the actual invasion by Alaric and the Goths, and he notices something strange.
Yeah, he points to what the sources call a historical anomaly.
What was so anomalous about it?
Well, we have to understand the ancient rules of war. The phrase, woe to the vanquished, wasn't just a saying. It was, for all intents and purposes, the law.
It was the operational reality.
Right. When a city falls after a long siege, the rules are absolutely brutal. You kill the men of fighting age, you enslave the women and children, and you loot everything, especially the temples.
Because that's the bank. That's where the treasure is.
Exactly. But Augustine points out that Alaric's sack of Rome was different. Alaric was a Goth, a barbarian in Roman eyes, but he was also an Arian Christian.
A heretic by the standards of the church in Rome, but a Christian nonetheless.
A Christian nonetheless.
Yeah.
And he gave a very specific, very unusual order. The great Christian basilicas, the shrines of the martyrs like St. Peter's and St. Paul's, were to be treated as sanctuaries, as safe zones.
That's fascinating. So you have these, bloodthirsty barbarians storming through the streets, swords out, adrenaline pumping.
The city is in chaos.
But if you could make it into one of these big churches, they would basically stop at the door.
Yes. And Augustine makes a huge deal out of this. He says this is completely contrary to the custom of war. He throws down a challenge to the pagans. He says, find me one other example.
One other example in all of history.
In all of history. Find another conquering army that captures a great city, but respects the religious shrines of the conquered people to that degree. Usually the first thing you do is smash their idols to prove your gods are stronger.
Right. My God beat your God. Look, I just melted his statue.
Precisely. And this leads to this deep, deep irony that Augustine really, really leans into.
Which is that a lot of the very same pagans who are currently trash-talking Christianity,
they only survived the slaughter because they ran and hid in Christian churches.
he's basically calling them out as massive hypocrites.
It's a stinging critique. He says, and I'm paraphrasing here, you are using your tongues to curse the name of Christ, but you're only alive to do so because you used your legs to run to Christ's altar.
Some of them were even pretending to be Christians to save their skins.
Or at the very least, they were taking full advantage of the sanctuary that Christianity and only Christianity provided in that moment. Augustine argues they should be attributing their survival to a merciful providence that restrained the fury of the Goths.
But instead, they chalk it up to their own good luck or fate.
And then they go right back to blaming the Christians for the destruction. He just paints this devastating picture of profound ingratitude.
So he exposes their hypocrisy, but he doesn't stop there. He goes on the offensive. He tackles their core accusation head on. The old gods protected us. The new God failed.
Yes, and this is where he flips the whole argument around with what we can call the Trojan counterpoint. It's one of my favorite logical takedowns in the entire work.
To get this, you have to know the Roman origin myth.
You do. Every Roman was raised on this story. They believed they were descended from the Trojans, specifically from the hero Aeneas, who fled the city of Troy when it was sacked and burned by the Greeks.
This is all from the Aeneid, Virgil's epic poem. It's like the Roman national Bible. Aeneas escapes the burning city carrying his elderly father on his shoulders and his household gods.
Exactly. He carries his gods, the Penates, out of the fire, brings them to Italy, and founds the race that would eventually become Rome. So Augustine asks a very simple but absolutely devastating question.
Which is?
If these are the very same gods that were in Troy, well, they didn't do a very good job of saving Troy, did they?
Wow, that is a great point. Troy was burned to the ground, utterly destroyed. The gods lost that war big time.
Augustine calls them vanquished defenders. He uses their own beloved poet Virgil against them, quoting the lines where Aeneas is fleeing with his conquered gods.
So the logic is just ruthless.
It's ruthless. He basically says, it is the height of folly to entrust the safety of Rome to a pantheon of gods who have already demonstrated their inability to protect their own previous city.
You're betting on a team that already has a major loss on its record.
It's even worse than that. He says if you read the story carefully, it wasn't the gods protecting Aeneas, it was Aeneas protecting the gods. Aeneas had to physically carry them out of the fire.
Right, they're just little statues.
If Aeneas hadn't rescued them, they would have been melted down into slag in the ruins of Troy. So this whole idea that these statues are the supernatural guardians of Rome is, in his view, historically absurd.
He's saying Rome has been guarding its gods for 1,000 years. Not the other way around.
He completely inverts the entire relationship of protector and protected. It's brilliant.
Okay, so that just demolishes the credibility of the pagan gods as protectors. But he still has to deal with the elephant in the room.
The really hard question.
The Christians suffered too. A lot.
Mm.
The Goths weren't checking baptismal certificates before they started looting houses and killing people. Christians were tortured, killed, and enslaved right alongside the pagans.
Yes. So the question becomes, if the Christian God is real and he's in charge, why didn't he put some kind of, divine force field around his own people?
Why do the good suffer with the wicked?
This is where we get into the really heavy philosophy. This is the ancient problem of evil or the problem of suffering. And Augustine absolutely refuses to give a shallow answer here. He doesn't say, oh, those Christians who suffered must have secretly sinned.
No easy outs.
No easy outs. He acknowledges that in this life, good things and bad things happen to everyone. It's a shared experience.
The sun rises on the evil and on the good, and the rain falls on the just and the unjust.
Precisely. But he uses this metaphor that I think is one of the most powerful and enduring images in all of Western thought. It's the analogy of the fire, the gold, and the chaff.
Okay, break that down for us. It's such a visual image.
Augustine says to imagine a great fire. You throw a piece of gold into that fire, and right next to it, you throw in a bundle of dry straw chaff.
Okay.
The fire is identical. The heat is the same. The event is the same for both, but the result is completely radically different.
The straw just smokes and burns up into ash. It's destroyed.
It's consumed, but the gold begins to glow. It liquefies, and all the dross, all the impurities that were mixed in with it, they melt and burn away. The gold becomes purer.
So the sack of Rome, that's the fire.
The sack of Rome is the fire. The event, the suffering, is the same for everyone. But the person experiencing it, their internal character, determines the result. For the wicked, for the chaff, the suffering is a torment that breaks them and reveals their emptiness.
But for the faithful, for the gold.
It is a testing, a purification, a trial that burns away attachments to earthly things and refines their faith. He also uses another image. The same flail breaks the straw but cleanses the grain.
So the suffering isn't meaningless if you're a good person. It's actually doing some kind of work on you.
It's redemptive, and he even takes it a step further, which might sound a little harsh to our modern ears. He suggests that for some devout Christians, being killed in the sack was actually a mercy.
A mercy. How so?
It was a swift release from the miseries and temptations of this world. So in the grand scheme of eternity, they didn't lose anything of real value. They lost their money, their homes, maybe their physical lives, but they didn't lose their faith or their soul, which is the only thing that truly matters.
Okay, speaking of losing things, there was a very specific, very real anxiety the Romans had about the dead. The streets were filled with bodies. Families couldn't get to their relatives to give them a proper burial.
And in the ancient world, and honestly in many cultures today, not being buried is a huge deal. It's a profound horror.
The idea that your spirit can't rest, that you'll be dishonored.
It was a source of massive trauma. The pomp of obsequies, as Augustine calls it, the whole funeral ritual, was considered absolutely essential. If you weren't buried, you were doomed to wander the banks of the river Styx.
But Augustine challenges this head on. He says, look, let's think about this. The body is just a vessel. The soul, the real person, is already gone. The state of the corpse has no bearing on the state of the soul.
And he uses a biblical example to drive this home, doesn't he?
He does. He contrasts the rich man, Dives, and the poor man, Lazarus, from the Gospel of Luke. The rich man died and had this magnificent funeral, purple robes, a carved marble tomb, the whole 9 yards. But in the afterlife, his soul was in torment.
Right, and Lazarus, the poor beggar, he died at the rich man's gate. He likely had no burial at all. His corpse was probably just thrown in a ditch. The dogs licked his sores. But his soul was carried by angels to Abraham's bosom.
So the fancy funeral is really just a comfort for the living, not a benefit for the dead.
Exactly. It's about our own feelings, not their eternal state. And he offers this very stoic, but also incredibly poetic line of comfort to those whose loved ones were left unburied, or eaten by animals, or lost in the rubble. He quotes the poet Lucan.
What's the line?
He who has no tomb has the sky for his vault.
He who has no tomb has the sky for his vault. Wow. That is breathtaking.
Isn't it? He's basically telling them, don't worry about a plot of earth. God knows how to resurrect a body, even if it's been scattered to the four winds. God doesn't need a headstone to find you. He built the entire universe. He can certainly reassemble the dust.
That's powerful, a really powerful piece of pastoral care in the middle of all this philosophy.
It is.
But there was an even darker, more sensitive issue that Augustine had to address. We're talking about the violation of women. During the sack, many Roman women, including consecrated Christian virgins, were raped.
This is section 3 in our source material, and it's a very difficult, very important read. We have to understand the Roman mindset here. For a Roman woman, her honor, her entire social standing, was inextricably tied to her chastity.
If she was violated, even against her will, she was considered ruined. The shame was seen as unbearable.
It wasn't just a personal trauma, it was a kind of social death sentence. There was this immense public dishonor attached to it.
So much so that suicide was often considered the honorable way out. The noble thing to do was to kill yourself so you didn't have to live with the shame.
Yes, and this is where Augustine steps in with what is, for the time, a radically different definition of virtue. It's revolutionary.
What does he argue?
He argues that virtue sits in the will, not in the body. He says purity is a state of the soul, a quality of the mind. If the mind does not consent to the act, if the will refuses it and fights against it, then the body's suffering is not a sin.
It's just violence. It's something that happens to you, not something that you do.
That distinction is absolutely crucial. He's trying to lift this immense burden of guilt off the shoulders of these survivors. He tells them, another's lust cannot pollute you.
He uses an analogy to clarify this, right?
He does. He uses the example of a midwife who might accidentally injure a virgin during a medical examination. He says the physical bodily integrity might be lost, but the holiness, the chastity of her will remains completely intact because there was no lustful intent.
So he's telling these women, you have suffered a terrible evil, but you have not sinned. Your chastity is still intact in the eyes of God because your will, your mind, never wavered.
Exactly. But then, to prove his point, he has to go head-to-head with a Roman cultural icon, the ultimate symbol of this pagan honor culture.
Lucretia.
Lucretia. Every Roman schoolboy knew her story. She was the Wonder Woman of Roman virtue.
The ultimate model. She was an ancient Roman matron who was raped by the king's son, and afterwards she calls her husband and father, tells them what happened, makes them swear an oath of vengeance.
And then, in front of them, she pulls out a dagger and stabs herself to death to prove her honor.
She's the pagan saint of chastity. And Augustine, he does not see her that way at all.
No, he deconstructs her legend mercilessly. He sets this perfect logical trap for her admirers. He asks a simple question. When Lucretia killed herself, was she innocent or was she guilty?
Okay, let's walk through that.
If she was innocent, if she truly did not consent to the adultery, then why did she kill an innocent woman?
Meaning herself.
Yeah.
She committed murder against an innocent person.
Right. Suicide is self-murder, so she's innocent, she's also a murderer. But on the other hand, if she killed herself because she felt she was guilty, which would imply that on some level she consented or even enjoyed it, then she died with the sin of adultery on her conscience.
It's a trap. There's no good answer. If she's innocent, she's a murderer. If she's guilty, she's an adulteress.
Exactly. And Augustine's verdict is that Lucretia did not kill herself out of a pure love for chastity. She killed herself out of shame. She was terrified of what other people would think.
It was pride. She was driven by the Roman obsession with public reputation, not by true internal virtue. She couldn't bear the thought of people whispering about her.
It was, in his view, the act of a woman too greedy of praise. And this leads him to his hard line on suicide for Christians. He says, you cannot take the Lucretia option.
It's just not on the table.
It's not. Augustine is very firm. Suicide is homicide. It violates the commandment, thou shalt not kill. And that commandment doesn't have an asterisk that says, except for yourself.
And he also argues you can't kill yourself to avoid a future sin. Like, I might be captured and raped, so I'll kill myself now to prevent it.
Correct. You cannot commit a certain definite evil, the act of murdering yourself, in order to avoid a merely possible future evil.
So he contrasts Lucretia with a different kind of hero. And interestingly, he uses another pagan to make his point, a Roman general named Regulus.
Yeah, Regulus is Augustine's favorite pagan, and you can see why. He was a Roman general captured by their mortal enemies, the Carthaginians. They sent him back to Rome on parole to negotiate a prisoner exchange, but they made him swear a sacred oath. If he failed to get the Senate to agree to the exchange, he had to return to Carthage to be executed.
And he goes back to Rome, stands before the Senate, and tells them not to do the exchange because it's a bad deal for Rome.
He argues against his own freedom, and then he turns around and honors his oath. He goes back to Carthage,
Knowing what's waiting for him.
knowing exactly what's waiting for him. Augustine describes it vividly. They supposedly locked him in a box filled with sharp spikes and deprived him of sleep by cutting off his eyelids until he died from pain and exhaustion.
That's horrific.
It's horrific. But Regulus didn't kill himself to escape the pain. He didn't kill himself to escape the humiliation. He endured the suffering to preserve his integrity, to keep his word.
So Augustine's point is, what?
His point is, if this pagan general could endure that level of torture without committing suicide, all for the sake of an oath to an earthly city, surely Christians who have the hope of an eternal reward can endure suffering without killing themselves.
He's using the best of Rome to critique the worst of Rome. He's saying Regulus was truly brave, Lucretia was just proud.
Precisely.
Okay, so we've covered the historical blame game, the problem of suffering, the morality of suicide. Now let's pivot to section 4. Augustine decides to go after the science of the day.
We're talking about astrology.
This is a fascinating turn. We might think of astrology as just, You know, the horoscope section in the back of a magazine.
But for many Romans, especially the educated ones, this was serious business. It was a deterministic philosophy. Many claim that Rome's rise to greatness wasn't due to the gods at all. It was fate. It was written in the stars.
Augustine just decides to dismantle the whole system using pure observation and logic.
He does. And he brings out what I think is his single best argument against it, the twins argument. It's so simple, but it is just devastating.
It really is. I honestly don't know how an ancient astrologer could even begin to argue against it.
Well, his point is this. He looks at twins. He uses the biblical example of Jacob and Esau, but he also just appeals to common, everyday experience. Twins are conceived at the exact same moment. They are born, at most, minutes apart.
So the sky hasn't changed. The constellations, the position of the planets, it's all identical for their birth charts.
Effectively, yes. So, according to the rules of astrology, they should have the exact same destiny. The same health, the same wealth, the same marriage prospects, the same death.
But they don't.
But they obviously don't. Augustine says, just look around you. One twin becomes a soldier and dies in battle. The other becomes a quiet farmer and lives to be 90. One travels the world. The other never leaves his home village.
In the case of Jacob and Esau, one was beloved, the other was an outcast. One became a master, the other a servant. Their lives couldn't have been more different.
Right. And there's this mathematician, a guy named Nigidius, who actually tried to come up with an explanation for this. It's known as the Potter's Wheel argument.
This story is almost like a comedy sketch.
It really is. So Nigidius, to defend astrology, argued that the sky spins so incredibly fast that even a split-second difference in birth time corresponds to a huge distance in the heavens.
Okay.
And to prove this, he took a potter's wheel, got it spinning really, really fast, and then dabbed it twice with ink in what felt like the same spot. When the wheel stopped, of course, the two ink marks were far apart.
So he's saying that tiny delay between the birth of the first and second twin is enough to give them totally different fates.
That's the argument.
Yeah.
But Augustine just sees the flaw immediately and destroys it, he says. Okay, let's grant your premise. Let's say the sky is moving that fast, so fast, that a 1-second difference can change a person's fate from king to slave.
If that's true.
Then how can astrologers possibly predict anything for anyone? They base their readings on these broad constellations that take hours to cross the sky. If you need nanosecond precision to get the chart right, then the entire practice of reading horoscopes is a complete impossibility.
It cuts both ways. It's a brilliant trap. Either the stars are slow enough to be read accurately, in which case twins should have identical fates, or the stars are moving too fast to be read, in which case all of astrology is just a scam.
There's no way out. He also mocks the whole idea of choosing days. Picking a lucky day under a certain star to get married or to plant your crops.
Right.
He asks this hilarious question. If you pick a lucky day to plant a whole field of wheat, why do some of the seeds rot in the ground while others sprout and grow strong? Did all the individual seeds have different horoscopes?
That's great. This seed was born under Saturn, so it's a bit gloomy. That one was born under Mars, so it's very aggressive.
It just exposes the sheer absurdity of trying to apply these rigid cosmic rules to the beautiful chaos of biological life. He shows that experience itself contradicts astrology at every turn.
So astrology is bunk, but this leads to a much deeper philosophical problem, which you find in Section 5. If the stars don't control us and we have free will, what about God?
Right. And this is a problem that the famous Roman philosopher Cicero had obsessed over.
Cicero was a brilliant logician. And he saw a trap, a real paradox.
He did. He thought, okay, if God knows the future, if he has foreknowledge, then the future must be fixed. If God knows that I'm going to have a salad for lunch tomorrow, then it is a fact that I must have that salad.
And if I must do it, then I have no choice in the matter.
And if I have no choice, I don't have free will. It's a classic dilemma, determinism versus free will. And Cicero decided the only way to save human free will was to deny that God knows the future.
So he sacrificed God's omniscience to save human freedom.
He did. But Augustine comes along and says, you're creating a false choice. You don't have to pick one or the other. You can have both.
How does he thread that needle? Because on the surface, it really feels like a contradiction.
It's subtle, but it's brilliant. Augustine argues that what God foreknows is what our will shall be. Our will is itself one of the causes in the great chain of causes that God sees. God doesn't override your will. He sees your will in action from a perspective outside of time.
Can you give me an analogy for that?
Yeah, think of it this way. Imagine you're a parent watching your toddler. You put a plate with a piece of broccoli and a chocolate chip cookie in front of them.
Okay, I know where this is going.
You know, with almost 100% certainty that the kid is going to grab the cookie. Does your knowledge force the kid's hand?
No, not at all. The kid wants the cookie. I just know my kid.
Exactly. Your knowledge doesn't compel the action. It just correctly anticipates the choice that the will is about to make freely. Now, amplify that knowledge to an infinite degree for an infinite God.
A God who is outside of time, who sees all moments past, present, and future at once.
Yes. He sees you in what we call the future, freely choosing the salad or the cookie. Augustine's term is that we are not dragooned by fate. We act because we will it, and God, in his timelessness, simply knows that will.
So it's observation, not coercion. It preserves human responsibility while also maintaining God's sovereignty and knowledge.
That's the synthesis he creates.
Okay, that makes sense. So if it wasn't the stars and it wasn't the pagan gods, we still have to answer the question that the Romans were asking.
Yeah.
Why was Rome so successful?
Right. They weren't just imagining it. They really did conquer the known world. They built an empire of law and infrastructure that lasted for centuries. You have to explain that success.
And Augustine has an answer.
He does. And his answer is surprisingly respectful of the Romans, even while being deeply critical. He says Rome didn't win because of Jupiter. They won because they possessed a specific, powerful type of virtue. He calls it civil virtue.
How is that different from what he would call true virtue?
Jupiter virtue, for Augustine, is always directed towards the love and service of God. Civil virtue is directed towards the glory and service of the state.
Okay.
He analyzes the Roman psyche, based on their own historians like Sallust, and he says they were obsessed, absolutely driven by two things: love of praise and desire for glory.
They wanted to be famous. They wanted to be remembered forever in the history books.
Exactly. They wanted historical immortality. And Augustine points out something fascinating. This one overwhelming desire was actually so strong that it acted as a restraint on their other, lesser vices.
What do you mean?
Well, they weren't lazy, because lazy people don't win battles and get glorious triumphs.
Yeah.
They suppressed greed for mere money because being a miser wasn't seen as glorious. They held back their baser instincts, lust, sloth, personal avarice, all in service to this one giant, all-consuming vice, the lust for glory.
So they were disciplined, they were brave, they were self-sacrificing, but it was all for the wrong reason. At its root, it was all vanity.
It was supreme vanity. But, and this is the absolute key to his argument, Augustine says God is just. The Romans worked incredibly hard for earthly glory. They sacrificed their wealth, their comfort, their safety, even their own children for the good of the earthly city. So God gave them what they worked for.
He gave them the empire.
He paid them their wages in the currency they desired. Augustine quotes that line from Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount, "Verily, they have received their reward."
That is a chilling thought.
It is. It's like God is saying, you wanted an earthly empire. You dedicated every fiber of your being to getting one. Fine, here it is. Enjoy it. But that is all you get.
Because their goal was entirely earthly, the reward is entirely earthly. And it ends when the earth ends, or when the Goths break down the gates.
Precisely. And Augustine, ever the preacher, uses this to shame the Christians of his day. He holds up these pagan heroes and says, if these Romans could sacrifice so much, if a man like Brutus could order the execution of his own sons for treason against the state, if Mucius could willingly burn his own hand off in a fire to show his resolve for Rome,
all for a city that is ultimately just dust and stone,
then what should you, as Christians, be willing to sacrifice for the eternal city, the city of God? He says, don't boast about giving a few coins to the poor when these pagans perform these incredible acts for mere vanity.
He's using their own heroes to raise the bar for Christian commitment.
It's a brilliant rhetorical move. He validates everything the Romans prided themselves on, their courage, their sacrifice, while simultaneously showing its ultimate spiritual hollowness.
Okay, let's move to section 7. We've dealt with the popular myths, the history, the science of the day. Now Augustine goes after the heavy hitters.
Yeah, now he's turning to the real intellectual opponents, the philosophers, specifically the Platonists.
And he has a lot of respect for them, doesn't he?
He really does. He thinks the Platonists are by far the smartest and best of the pagans. He says they came the closest to the truth.
Why? What did they get right?
They realized that the ultimate reality, God, isn't a body. God isn't a statue in a temple or a planet in the sky. They understood that God is immaterial light, truth, and being itself, the source of all goodness and existence.
So they got the who is God part mostly right. So
Yeah.
Where did they go wrong?
In a word, demons.
Okay, we need to define demon here because they didn't mean it in the way we might today, like a monster from a horror movie.
No, not necessarily. The Platonists, and he specifically engages with a writer named Apuleius, believed in a kind of cosmic hierarchy. You have the supreme god, or the one, at the very top, too pure and remote to have any direct contact with the messy material world.
And you have human beings at the very bottom, mired in flesh.
Right, too dirty to reach heaven on their own. And in the middle, filling that gap, you have the demons, the daemons. They saw them as the essential mediators. If you want to talk to the high gods, you have to go through the demons. They're the cosmic middlemen.
And Apuleius had a specific definition for them, something about aerial bodies and passive minds.
That's it. Aerial bodies just meant they lived in the air, between the earth and the heavens. And passive minds meant they were subject to passions and emotions. They could feel anger, jealousy, desire, happiness, just like humans.
And Augustine just tears this entire concept apart.
He absolutely demolishes it with simple logic. First, he tackles the aerial body thing. He says, so what? Just because you have an airy body doesn't make you morally or spiritually superior.
No.
Birds have aerial bodies. Are we supposed to worship geese just because they can fly and we can't?
That's a great, slightly comical image. I bow before the mighty goose.
And then he gets more serious and attacks the passive mind. He says, okay, if these demons are subject to all these passions, anger, jealousy, agitation, then they are miserable. They are eternally turbulent beings.
They're not at peace.
Not at all. So why, he asks, would you worship something that is miserable? And more importantly, why would you ever use a miserable, angry, agitated spirit as a messenger to a perfectly serene and peaceful God?
It's like asking your most emotionally unstable friend to handle a delicate negotiation for you.
It's a terrible idea. He argues we need a completely different kind of mediator. We don't need a go-between who shares our emotional flaws and just happens to live in the air. We need a mediator who shares our human mortality, but also possesses God's divine purity.
Which for him points directly to Christ.
Of course. He argues Christ is the only bridge that actually works because he is both truly human and truly God. He is pure and benevolent, whereas the demons are just, in his view, a form of cosmic static.
So we've gone through the bad gods, the bad history, the bad science, and the bad philosophy. Finally, in Section 8, Augustine gives us a positive vision, a picture of what success should look like.
Right. If the old Roman Empire was built on vanity and a lust for glory, what does a good Christian empire look like? What does a good ruler look like?
And to do this, he gives us the example of a recent emperor, Theodosius.
He does, and Augustine is very clear. A Christian emperor isn't happy just because he rules for a long time or wins a lot of battles. Plenty of wicked men do that.
Right. He mentions tyrants like Marius and Sylla who were incredibly successful, but were also monsters. So earthly success is not the measure of a good ruler.
No. The measure is virtue and humility, and he profiles Theodosius as the anti-Caesar. For Augustine, the defining moment of Theodosius's reign isn't a great military victory. It's a moment of profound public weakness and repentance.
You're talking about the massacre at Thessalonica.
Exactly. Theodosius, in a fit of rage, ordered a massacre of civilians in the city of Thessalonica to punish a riot. It was a horrific abuse of imperial power. Thousands of innocent people were killed.
A terrible stain on his legacy.
A terrible stain. But what happened next is what matters to Augustine. St. Ambrose, the powerful bishop of Milan, confronted the emperor. He publicly rebuked him and refused to let him receive communion.
Now, in the old days, a typical Roman emperor would have just had the bishop executed on the spot. You do not tell me what to do.
But Theodosius didn't. He didn't double down in his pride. Instead, he humbled himself. He stripped off his imperial robes, his symbols of power. He went to the church, knelt in the dirt in front of everyone, and wept for his sin.
The most powerful man in the world on his knees, publicly apologizing.
That, Augustine says, is true glory. Not conquering a nation, but conquering your own pride. He wrote that Theodosius rejoiced more in being a humble member of the church than he did in being a king upon the earth.
It's a complete reversal of the pagan value system. It's the idea that even the emperor is subject to a higher moral law.
Exactly. And that brings us to the core concept of the entire massive book, The Two Cities.
This is the grand finale, the big idea that ties it all together.
It is. Augustine says that from the beginning of time, all of humanity is divided. Every human being and every human society is building one of two invisible cities.
The earthly city.
Which is built on the love of self, even to the point of contempt for God.
And the heavenly city.
Which is built on the love of God, even to the point of contempt for self.
The earthly city seeks power, domination, earthly peace, and glory from men. The heavenly city seeks truth, service, eternal peace, and glory from God.
And the crucial point is that right now, in this life, these two cities are mixed together, intermingled. You can't look at a map and say, there is Babylon and over there is Jerusalem.
It's in the hearts of the people.
It's in the heart. Your neighbor might be a citizen of one and you a citizen of the other. Two people can be doing the exact same job, say, they're both soldiers. One does it for personal glory and power. He's building the earthly city. The other does it out of a sense of duty to protect the innocent. He's building the heavenly city. Same action, different loves.
Rome fell. Every earthly empire, every earthly city falls eventually. Augustine's ultimate point seems to be, don't anchor your hope, your identity, your ultimate security to something that could be sacked by Visigoths.
Build your foundation on the only thing that cannot be destroyed.
So as we wrap up, here's the final thought for you to chew on this week. Augustine wrote this masterpiece 1,600 years ago, while his entire world was literally falling apart. He looked at the smoking ruins of civilization and asked a fundamental question. Where is my true citizenship? Where is my real allegiance?
And that raises a really provocative question for us today. We all live in and work for our own earthly cities, our careers, our reputations, our families, our nations, and that's not bad. It's part of life. We have to live here.
But Augustine forces you to ask, if your Rome falls tomorrow, if the career suddenly ends, if the reputation is ruined, if the market crashes, if the nation you love changes beyond recognition, what do you have left?
What foundation is your life actually built on?
Which city are you really truly building in your daily life? That's the question Augustine leaves us with. Thanks for diving deep with us.
It was a great conversation.
We'll see you next time.